cutting a graduation from the outside in. I want kind of a rounded, head-hugging graduation here with the blade, and we'll talk about the blade in a minute. Sections coming across diagonally until they cross over and then working back the other way. You'll notice I've pre-sectioned into, I guess technically 4 because there were some bangs already here, but 3 zones or 3 panels, horseshoe on the top, kind of the meat here in the middle, and then the nape. Last week we were in New York City for an event at Bumble and Bumble. It was called Razor Fest, which was really awesome. And I was very inspired, as I always am, by the Bumble approach to razoring and looking at some of the classic images. And one of them was, one of the most classic, kind of credited with reinvigorating razor cutting. And it's the graduated bob from like 1988, where the nape is set in really close with the blade and really head hugging. And then there's a bob shape that's built up through the top without being really weighty or heavy. So I'm gonna, kind of work on something like that. Again, just taking my own approach. I'm working from the outside in here, diagonal sections, working with the blade a little bit flatter here in the nape, knowing that I'm taking this down shorter and I really don't want any kind of harshness or kind of chunkiness. So the blade's a little flatter and I really have a nice open swing to it, even on such short hair. You kind of, to get it to be graduated, you almost have to like will it in. You have to kind of set your fingers a little bit further away at the top of the head, a little bit closer at the bottom. Then as I'm razoring, I let my hand just kind of slip away or peel away, especially with bigger hands like mine, so that I can get in close to the bottom. And it's something I like about like the moving while I'm cutting. So this is what I mean. As I cut, my fingertips kind of peel. It's like I'm peeling that hair off the head. Something that works really nicely for me. It helps me to sit it into the base of the skull. Letting that hair lift, move, crossing over the center, and then I'll come back the opposite way because I'm not looking for asymmetry. I'm going to work from one direction and then back across the other, over directing slightly away to the previous each time and sitting this in nicely. Again, the great thing about great mannequins like the Pivot Point Maddie is that the hairline, actually behaves. It doesn't just pop up or, I know very often I go to teach a class and someone has decided maybe it's a good idea, try to save money and get cheaper mannequins. And unfortunately, the classes never go as well because, you can't really see the effect that you're going for. I mean, a good quality mannequin makes all the difference in a great class. So here you can see longer at the top, coming in closer and closer at the bottom.
Donna Hogg says hello.
Hey Donna, thanks for joining us here. Yep, we're happy to announce that we'll continue to do this series that we've been doing for many, many years with our friends at Pivot Point, the Professionals Who Practice series. A little heavier at the top on this side. So I'm just going to come in again and just dust this. So at least once a month, I'll be, kind of working on something. Again, as I said last week, we were in New York City at the Bumble and Bumble University, kind of the reopening of it. And, as always, very inspired by the history and the legacy of great razor cutting, something that's made such a difference in my career. And then, we did a little thing where we were looking through a lot of the classic images. And one of the most classic is kind of the razor graduated bob done by Howard McLaren. I think it was 1988. Again, probably wasn't cut in any way the way that I'm approaching it. This is just my own interpretation of the visual of, I know it had a tight, very textured nape, and then it kind of built up into the bob shape without any real weight. And again, why choose the razor? For me, it's an artistic choice. I like the smudginess of the lines. I really do. I used to love sharp, clean lines at one point in my career, and then I just kind of got into something different. It doesn't mean that you can't be technical or precise or accurate. It's just the actual line itself, instead of a solid line, is kind of a smudgy or scribbly line. But I still need all of my control, all of my precision, all of my understanding of hair cutting. So there you can start to see this nice little panel of graduation. Here, crossing into the opposite side, this is where I should start to match up with the bottom. The top from this side should match up with the bottom from the other side. And there it does. That's always a good kind of, you know, feeling. Might be a few more hairs here. Just bringing it back towards the previous to build that little bit of weight in the center, you know, kind of in the round graduated approach. One little piece left here.
Bartek says hello from Poland and Sid Soton.
Yeah, we got people watching from all over the world. That's always good. We love to have our friends, especially our great friend Sid, great educator, great person, old friend. Can do a little bit of checking across with the blade here. Just lifting and lightly making sure there's no heavy corner in the middle. There shouldn't be, because I didn't over direct a lot. And we've got this panel sitting. One of the things I want to do here is put a little bit of product in the nape. This is the Brilliantine from our friends at Bumble. Another great thing about these mannequins, you can work with them, you can style them, you know, because it is 100% human hair, this particular mannequin. It's incredibly responsive to heat as well as just hand styling. And the Brilliantine just works as like a great, it's kind of an oil-based product to really kind of show what's happening in here and bring out all that work, subtle work from the blade. Really pushing it into the hair. Again, you know, as someone who's out teaching classes all the time, I really love to teach people, especially when it's something new or challenging they haven't done before. I love to introduce it to them on a mannequin and let them practice. That's the whole idea, you know, build their confidence, build their understanding, control. Then bring in later in that day or the next day or within that week, bring in a live model, you know, so you can see how hairlines react. But to have a little practice under your belt, still doing that all the time whenever I have to do a show or an event. I work with my pivot point mannequins to kind of work through my ideas. And then when I do find the right model, it's a perfect kind of moment. I'm prepared. All right, now working into this next area is where I want to start to develop the bob shape. So I'll take different kind of sections here. I'll take kind of true, kind of following the head shape, almost horizontal. I don't want them to be too angled because this really shouldn't be extremely steep. With the way the graduation is built up, this should kind of come in and hug right below the ear. And you know, normally I'd go back and forth, but just to make it easier, I'm going to work on one side at a time here. So I'm going to bring this down. Again, you know, the thing with razor cutting, especially with the blade as open and as flat as it has been here, you're going to have very, very soft guidelines. They're more like reference points. So you really just have to, first of all, you have to understand. I think if you haven't cut a shape like this with a scissor, you have to do that, and you have to kind of master that first to know where the bones of the shape should be. Because you're not going to have very, very sharp, solid guidelines. You have to look for reference points and kind of touch points to know exactly where it should be. And now looking to see I'm not developing any kind of a line. That bottom sitting in, building the bevel or the contour. You know, and that can be one of the challenges with the scissor, depending on the hair, its density, your ability to control elevation. You could be doing the technique very beautifully here, but start to develop maybe kind of a little bit more heaviness than maybe you'd envisioned, where once you get really good with the blade here, you can control that by the stroke. So really making sure that there's, even though I'm building the length here, there's no heavy line building. Over direction, very, very slightly back. Elevation down 45 degrees off the base of the section through this area. And then really kind of thinking about what the stroke should be in any particular area. Here, I'll probably close my stroke down a little bit because we need to develop a little bit more of a line below the ear. If my stroke or the cutting action of the blade is too deep into the hair, it might be a little bit too soft or kind of shattered in this area. So again, you know, there's still work that can be done on the hairline. I don't want to get sucked into it too soon, you know, but I can kind of pinch and use the blade, and just looking really right now at the contour of the head that's building up here. Continuing through, probably split this in 2 sections rather than taking it in one. You know, I like my sections probably about a 1/2 inch thick with a shape like this, because I'm trying to, you know, build and control the texture. So if the sections are a little too thick, I might get just kind of too abrupt of a texture. If they're too thin, the hair is going to kind of turn out too airy and too thinned out with the depth of the stroke here. Coming through, giving my hand room. I can see where the guideline is. And in this case, I'm able to hold my hand a little bit further away, closing the stroke a little bit more in the front here. Love that shape coming through right there. Last section in this area, we'll drop this over. You know, if the hair feels like it's starting to get a little thick here, you can start to remove little channels of weight before you even cut the length. And just knowing the Maddie mannequin, you know, there's a little more density in the crown there, which is a great thing. It gives you more to work with. So you can see I did a little bit of what I like to call slicing there to remove some channels of weight. Kept the length, but took out some of the excess weight. Then I will decide if I need to do it here. You know what, I will, but maybe I won't go in so deep. I'll just focus towards the ends of the hair. You know, just a great feeling when you're working with the blade here, as you can just kind of sketch into the hair. I'll keep the front a little heavier just for the moment to keep that kind of corner on there. Okay, developing nicely. I finished this side. I'm going to repeat that now on this side. Just try to repeat it as best I can. So looking at the underneath, again, basically the line's just coming through right here. It doesn't need to be extremely steep, the section. I think sometimes that's where we go wrong. You know, we think about these shapes and they get so dramatic that, you know, I guess it's a taste level, but to me, I like it real subtle. Just kind of like with the line of the jaw, with the cheekbone, as opposed to being really, really dramatically angled. Coming down. Give myself a little space. Like I can see the guideline and I give myself a little space, especially because I'm using such an open stroke here. And then making sure that there's no weight line developing. You know, always being careful the closer I get towards the front, especially in these underneath sections, to close the stroke down a little bit. So I start to develop a little bit of weight and line beneath the ear. Next section. Through. Obviously, this is going to be a crucially important section. You know, combing is so important. I love the, this is the Comb Bank 720. I love the wide side of the comb to get that hair kind of moving and to take sections, and then the fine side of the comb to give me great tension and control. You know, I'm a firm believer that, you know, I like to razor the hair damp with tension. Now, you know, that can create some issues for people because you have to kind of know how much hair is going to jump or spring and put it into your formula, so to speak. You know, it's like when you're doing color, you know, you don't just get what's in the tube. There's like a formula. You have to think what's the pre-existing color. So with hair, you have to think with cutting, it's the same. But why do I like it to be damp? I like it to be damp because the blade glides nicely. It doesn't tug on the cuticle. And that's important to me. You know, I think a lot of times people are afraid that a razor can damage hair, and it can, but so can a scissor, so can bleach, so can curling irons. It's professionals learn how to use things and never create damage in the hair. And one of the things for me that works is to make sure the hair is damp, to use a cutting lotion that helps. In this case, I'm using Bumble and Bumble Tonic, one of my all-time favorites. It's got a little tea tree oil in it, gives a nice slip. And then using a sharp blade, so important. I work with the unguarded blade. You don't have to. I can show you. Let's see, is there a blade in here? No. But if you do work with a guarded blade, you can do the same exact technique that I'm doing here. Over the years, I've graduated through training and practice to feel really comfortable and, you know, safe with the unguarded blade. But again, it doesn't just happen overnight. It takes practice. It takes great training, taking a course. There's more people now than ever using these type of razors and who can teach you how to use them safely, myself included. We've got a great course called Razorcraft on HB Live, hblive.me or Hairbrain Live, which is our online academy. And I've got lots of razor courses on there, as well as lots of other great artists who have their courses, and we can show you how to safely work with the straight edge blade. So looking for that movement, doing a little detailing, guy kind of pinching around the edges here, working on the hairline, but not getting sucked in too early. This would probably be the last section here. I think I did same amount on the other side. And this is where I started to channel through the hair a little bit, where I know it gets a little thicker and denser right in here in the crown, and maybe I want a little more lightness. Really letting the hand roll into the shape. Come through. You know, if I wasn't, you know, kind of working like this with Randy over my shoulder with the camera, I'd definitely be spending more time checking the balance. I don't know if the balance is perfect, to be honest with you, because I haven't looked. But if I was in front of a mirror or kind of checking the class, teaching the class, I would definitely stop like I'm going to do now quickly and see. A little heavy. Yeah, definitely a little heavy on this side. So I'm just going to come back through. I'm going to use a little bit. If I need to adjust things slightly, I just use the tip of the blade to do some tipping. Remove a little bit of this heaviness here. Excess length. You know, if you have to remove just a tiny bit of hair, it can be, especially with the blade being very open and loose, it can be hard to do. So sometimes you can just use the tip to remove a little bit of length and weight. See how that's feeling? It's the tip of the blade. Better. Good. And, you know, sometimes I'll even pick up the scissor if I feel like, I need to strengthen the line. You know, I use every tool at my disposal to make things work. That's the most important thing to me, is to make it work. And by work, I mean, you know, make it look good, make it look beautiful and suitable and whatever your goal was. So here, just doing a little bit of adjusting. More checking earlier, and I would have caught that quicker. But it does happen, and it will happen. And, you know, learning how to have enough control is the key. And, you know, I will be honest, for many years when I was first starting to razor, I would say, all right, I'm going to pick up the scissor and do a little checking, because I just felt more comfortable, more acclimated to doing things with the scissor. I'll show you what I mean. And this would be a good time to maybe do it before I move on. Do a little checking here. So even in the bottom, I might kind of come over the comb where this was very textured and really bring the comb around to make sure I'm keeping it graduated. Go in with some deep point cutting. Always looking in the center here to make sure there isn't a heavy corner developing. And then I can always kind of cross-check, coming the opposite way to look and see how the graduation is building. See how airy those ends are? That's why we're not getting any kind of a heavy weight line or build-up. Coming through, check behind the ear. On the first side to get a feel for it. Check behind the ear on the second side. You know, and it's, again, it's not unusual if you're first starting with the blade to feel like you need to rely a little bit more on the scissor. You know, try to use point cutting. Don't go and rush to kind of make it blunt again. And, you know, eventually you won't need, you know, you'll kind of know where the touch points are, you know. Again, a little bit more checking before I progressed into the second side, and I would have probably nailed this the first time, and so will you. But it's pretty common if you don't check and you kind of keep going, you might build a little bit too much weight. You know, I think that's part of being a great hair cutter, is being honest with yourself and being able to refine something. It's not about getting it perfect the first time. It's about taking it as far as you can through the process and doing it efficiently. Okay, let's get fingers in the hair again. Good. Good. So one little thing I want to do to the front of this before we get into the top, just want to take off this front, not take off, but separate out this very front corner. And something that this event that we just did at Bumble and Bumble, we brought together some great razor cutters, and we had Jane Ito, also Jane Matthews is her actual name. And then we also had Jacob Kahn, and we had some of the core Bumble team, and we had Amanda Jenkins. And one of the things that I love that Jane did on one of the front of her cuts was to kind of help emphasize this nice little kick on the front. So I kind of came from shorter behind and shorter on the top to help give that little piece its little kick. So it's already kind of got it naturally, but as we know, you know, all hair cutters kind of know, short hair helps to direct long hair. So if I put some short hair in here, pushing to long hair, and some short hair in here, pushing to long hair, that should help me get that fun little kick on the front that we love. You just got to learn how to do it gently without, you know, making kind of big holes in the shape. So this mannequin previously, this Maddie mannequin from our friends at Pivot Point, had some fringe, some bangs, which I like. Was a little bit on the heavier side. I think that suits this. And I think what I want to do is use that as a point for layering. So I'm going to come from that length of the fringe or the bang, and I'm going to put some long layers on the top here. There'll be some disconnection to start off with the bob, and then I'll use some techniques to blend it in. Here I feel like I can take my sections a little bit thicker. They'll probably be more like an inch thick, and I'll take one right down the center here. I'm going to come up, forward, and I'm going to look for my starting point, which is right here. And then, you know, I don't need too much extra length. You know, I don't mind if this is a little disconnected to refine, but I want it to kind of maybe be like in there. So I'm looking for nothing, not too crazy, just going from here to here. Now I have to think about my body position. I want to bring her around so that I am able to come through with my blade. Got a good angle there, Andy? Mm-hmm. So bringing this hair up and forward. First thing I'll do is a little bit of pre-lightening or slicing through. So taking out some of the bulk, and especially right here, because that's the hair that's going to fall over. So we've taken some of that out. Now I've got a little bit of the hair from the fringe or the bang, and I'm going to work out a little bit longer from there. Just, there might be a little bit overhanging the bob, but I don't want it to be tons. Now I'm going to take a section kind of pivoting off the crown. I could probably take this all in one. You know, as I said, I'm working a little bit thicker. Not too much over direction because there's already enough extra length here. So just kind of on base. Again, first pre-lightening by slicing through, especially coming back this way here. This is the hair that's going to fall over in the back. So by kind of grinding it a little bit that way, when it falls over, it'll blend in more. And again, finding the guide from the previous hair and also from the fringe and working out to the length that I want. Now you could also have blended this into the underneath bob more horizontally if you wanted a heavier shape, but I kind of wanted to, since there already was a bang there, so you can see there's some little bits of disconnection that I'll play with here, but it really already kind of melts in. And I might just even just play with these just very visually. I don't know that they need to be super technical. You know, it could be if I felt like I needed something more, but in this case, I'm feeling very kind of visual about it. Could always go back through if I feel like it needs something a little bit stronger. So literally just looking at where they're falling and working through. Not getting too far ahead of myself, I need to now come to the opposite side. I want the blade coming from under the hair, so that's how I choose my body position here. Pivot off the crown. Trying not to over direct too much. So I tilted the head towards me so that I would be able to lift higher. Coming through first, pre-lightening the hair. Especially as I've been saying back here, this is the main area where it's going to fall over. So you see I turn the blade around like that. Now coming in, using the previous hair from the center as a guide and also referencing the fringe or the bangs. And really turning that blade around to go with the grain of the hair. A lot of people find this to be a kind of a tricky position to cut in, and it is, but just like anything, if you practice, it works great. I know this is that extra kind of long, heavy point, just twisting a little bit. And again, looking at how that's gonna fall over and visually blend in. Maybe it's not a technical blend, but I think we're at a point in hair cutting, at least a lot of us are, where technically blending isn't always the goal. It's visual blending and allowing the hair to have more movement. Let's see what happens as that starts to fall over. Again, just visually, any of those bits that are falling over longer, working them in. Back to getting a little bit of product in the hair and then doing some final kind of assessments on the shape. So starting in the, applying tonic again to revamp the hair. Lighter than water and with a little bit of tea tree oil in it. Bumble and Bumble tonic. Looking at those little kind of kicks that we made around the face. Looking at how the layers are falling. Now also another kind of legendary, great for razor cutting, Brilliantine, kind of an oil-based cream. Really seal the ends, especially on this kind of short blonde hair. Pushing it through the hair from the root all the way out to the ends. Just getting my fingers in there. So I think, as I look visually, I guess it's the only way you can really look, right? Can't look with your ears. I know that I want to start to look at the back hairline to really make sure that I've got the right proportion. Because, very often the hairline can be a little bit lower than we want it to be. I'm going to use deep point cutting. I could, again, use the blade, but I don't question it, I try to think all tools have value, and I just kind of go with whatever my feeling is at the second. There's no right or wrong. You just kind of want to express the way you want something to look. But, visually, I knew that, there's a certain kind of sweet spot for something like this, where if the hairline is a little bit too low, it kind of changes it. And you want to get this nice kind of balance. And again, since these hairlines respond so well, you can get underneath it like you would on a person and kind of undercut it a little bit. Could also have been done with the blade before I even started, but I just wanted to kind of jump right in, and I'm doing more of the finishing work with the scissor. So going underneath, cleaning that up, looking at how that hair is behaving and performing. You see that little extra kick just from that little shaping at the front. Same here. So this is really all about the profile. That's why I keep kind of moving. I'd look in the mirror, I'd look to see what's happening, and then I'd work this kind of deep pointing, come back the opposite way, get underneath. And looking for a certain balance here. you know, again, I do think learning, as I say all the time, first how to do it as clean as possible. I still believe, you know, and even if you can't find a client that wants a very clean, solid, graduated bob, even with a weight line, that's when practicing on great mannequins come in. Because there's something to absolutely be said about learning how to do a very sharp version of what I've been doing here. It's maybe one of the most important things you can do as a hair cutter. And, you know, even if something like that isn't the trend, it's still so important to be able to have the chops and the mastery to do it. Now coming back through, looking at the fringe. Really didn't cut anything off here because it was already kind of existing, but just seeing how it's fitting in now with the newer layers. Probably going to be some pieces in the corner that fall over. And again, it's not unusual for me to kind of rough. It's interesting, I think a lot of people do a lot of their shape with the scissor and then come back with the razor to loosen it up at the end. Over the years with my clients, I've kind of gotten the opposite. I do like the shape and kind of rough it in with the razor. And then a lot of times I do the refining with the scissor. It's just kind of a different way of thinking about it. I do a very kind of soft shape and then determine where it needs the strength, and works well for the kind of look that I'm trying to create. Adding more strength at the end where it's needed. Even a little bit blunt here. Coming in to the corners and back into the fingers. And, you know, again, if you've worked in a lot of classes and perhaps you've worked with mannequins that aren't so great, I mean, you can't even do any of this. You get to this point and the hair is just all sticking up, and, you know, especially if you want to do any kind of shorter hair cutting or kind of textured hair cutting, you know, and that's, again, the beauty. It's why we love working with Pivot Point, because you can not only cut color and style, but you can, you know, cut shorter and stronger, and you can get that hair to actually lay down and do stuff and look good, where sometimes that can be impossible. And that's never fun. Coming back to the blade just to, again, work on that very front piece. Just skimming from short to long, and then doing it again from the underneath here. Super, super gentle. I think, you know, very often we think the razor can be so aggressive, and of course it can, but it's all how you're using it. You can also cut like one hair at a time, very, very gently. It's all about pressure, just barely scraping the hair and peeling off a few pieces here and there to help get that fun little quirkiness. Blur the edges a bit.